Lesson 2.6 are number properties. You need to be able to apply all the different properties that we're working with to simplify our problems, especially the commutative, associative, and distributive. The lesson today is mostly going to focus on commutative and associative property. We'll use these to help us solve the problems as we are looking at them. So far you should have both the identity property of addition and multiplication. You should have the additive inverse from 2.2. We are now today going to look at the commutative property in 2.6 of both addition and multiplication, and the associative property in both addition and multiplication. So shortly you're going to see these in your notes that you can fill in. Distributive property comes into the next lesson. You should also be looking at having the multiplication property of 0. What is the commutative property? The key thing about commutative property is that it lets us switch the order. So if the key thing you can think of commutative property is switch the order, that is the key thing of that property. You can add two numbers or sum, remember sum is add, in any order. 4 plus negative 9 is the same as negative 9 plus 4. A lot of times you might see it written as a plus b equals b plus a. We can switch the order. Multiplying factors of a product in any order. Again, remember, multiplication, product is our multiplication, either using a parenthesis or asterisk. So 3 times negative 7 is going to give us the same answer as negative 7 times 3. This property comes in very handy when you have a big string of numbers, and sometimes it's easier to regroup them to make a simpler problem so we don't have to use our calculator. Properties of subtraction. Subtraction, remembering that subtracting a number is the same as adding its opposite. Remember, adding the opposite. So you can always rewrite subtraction, and then you can use a commutative property. If you don't rewrite it, you cannot reuse that property. So when you have this long string of numbers, negative 63 plus 38 minus 17, our first thing, definition of subtraction, is changing it to adding the opposite of 17, which is negative. Now in this case, when we look at the problem, we might want to regroup using our commutative property and put the negative 17 in the middle. Why? Adding the two negatives together becomes a lot easier. First off, noticing that this one ends in a 3 and this one in a 7 adds to a power of 10, and we actually get a negative 80. So adding those together, plus 38. Now remember, signs are opposite. Who's going to win the battle? And in this case, it's negative, is larger, has a larger absolute value. We're going to subtract. So we're going to take 80 minus 38, and 80 minus 38 gives us a solution of negative 42. Notice here it says when deciding what numbers to add or multiply first, look for pairs whose sum or whose product ends in a 0. Because of multiples of 10 seem to be a lot easier to work with in our head when we don't have a calculator. What does the associative property say? It says you can use the associative property for addition and multiplication to evaluate it more easily using mental math. The key thing about associative property is moving the parentheses. Moving the parentheses. So you're not really switching the order, you're just moving what's inside the parentheses. Starts with 1 plus 3 plus 6 equals, now they're telling us we should add the last two together. So it changes the grouping is the key thing about associative property. The numbers do not change. A plus B plus C, same order. Here in the parentheses, it's telling us to add first A and B, now B and C. Again, change the grouping for multiplication. 8 times 2 times 4, multiplying the 2 times 4, 8 times 8, a lot of people can get 64, whereas if you go 16 times 4, that might not be a fact that's known by as many people. Again, where do we use the associative property? We would want to regroup. Add our two fractions first. So negative 3/8 plus a negative 5/8. The nice thing about that, it adds to a negative 8/8. What is negative 8 divided by 8? It's the same as 1. Negative 1 plus 10 gives us 9. Again, using the associative property with multiplication in this problem, we have 6 times 9 times 5. If we're going to multiply the 5 times 9, notice we switch the order around. That's our commutative property. Now if we want to move the parentheses and multiply the 6 times 5, and the main reason for wanting to multiply 6 times 5 is that's 30. And 30 is an easier number to multiply, and if you think of 3 times 9, 3 times 9 is 27, so 30 times 9 gives us 270. Thinking of our phrases, commute means to change location. Commutative property, you're changing the order. Associative means groups. It's who you associate with. So you can use the associative property to put it in a different group. In your notes, if you turn to your notes, identifying properties, lesson 2.6, we want to give the reason for our property. So if we look at this and it says 2 plus 7 plus 8 equals 2 plus 8 plus 7, from one side of the equal sign to the other, we switched the 7, 8 to 8, 7. What property would that be? Take a look at your notes. Pause the video if you need to. This should be the commutative property. Commutative property of addition. 8 times 1 equals 8. Again, take a look at your notes. That is our multiplication, and it is the identity. Keeping in mind what our identity is. Here we have 3 times 2 times 6, 3 times 2 times 6 again. But notice the parenthesis moves. When we change the parenthesis, we are talking about the associative property, in this case, of multiplication. 5 times 0 equals 0. That is our multiplication property of 0. And the last one, we add a number and its opposite, we get 0. That is our additive inverse. Now, I would like you to pause the video and take out your notes and take a look at the properties. When you come into class, I should see your properties filled in behind each one of these. We will look at those and answer questions in class. Thanks and have a nice night.